All right, welcome back to Following Noadon, episode 59. Now, this week we will be covering chapters 12 through 16, I believe. How are you doing this week, Elliot?
I'm doing great. We're getting into some exciting stuff. We talked last week that things are feeling a little slow. I think we got a little bit more excitement in these chapters, maybe, but yeah, I'm doing good.
Great, always glad to hear. How about you, Trevor?
I'm doing well. I'm excited as always to get your guys' first reactions to chapters. So we do have some interesting content this week, and I'm excited to hear what you guys think.
Great. Now, I did do our intro this week, but Trevor does not have two words, but in fact I have two words, so I'm just gonna go and start us off. Um, right into it. So for these chapters 12 through 16, my two words were frustration and remembrance. So frustration and remembrance. And so Elliot, what were your two words?
Mine are super meaningful and deep and introspective. They are no mating.
No mating. Oh, fabulous. Iconic, if you would.
Incredible words. Same energy as I am a stick, but now we have no mating.
Exactly.
Yeah, very funny. All right, well, we will come back and dive into these two words. Four words. Yeah, four words. Yeah.
My words may be cheeky, but they still count as two.
Yes, sure. And I'll let you take it coming back, Trevor.
I'm just gonna keep that audio over our intro clip, and so like
Yeah.
it's gonna play. the audio's gonna play.
I wonder when Capybaras is gonna come out. Probably not anytime soon.
All right. We do have to start at no mating because it's so iconic. The just as a fan favorite as no, I am a stick from Words of Radiance. In the fandom, no mating is equally as popular. So go ahead and start us, Elliot.
I was going to ask you actually that exact question. I had a feeling that this might be an iconic line in here, which is why I picked it. I don't honestly have anything super insightful to say about this other than we get some interesting Adolin and Shalon interactions and some classic hilarious. I laughed out loud as I was reading my book at when Pattern chimed in there. It was great.
Yeah. Hey, well, shout out to Kate Redding with the audiobook because she did a great job with the like no mating. I definitely can't do anything like it, but it was very funny and probably my favorite. Like we didn't have the Syl moments like we did last week, but we got some really great pattern moments. Um, so it was great.
I don't know how
Um,
Kate Redding does it, but she always talks as pattern it with like a buzz in her tone. She's
yeah,
like, no mating, and you're like, how do you do
yeah,
that for
it is.
55-hour book? Like.
Yeah, it's very impressive. Very, very impressive. Yeah, she buzzes like all the. It's impressive. Um, so if I do say so myself, I will talk about my words a little bit before we dive into our first chapter.
Yeah.
Um, so my first word was frustration, and it's mostly talking about our overarching theme is Dal and I are working to get the other Oath Gates kind of online, and there's just a whole lot of frustration with that, a lot of kind of lousy politics and drama and stuff going on there, and just like lies, and just a really frustrating system for something that I feel like shouldn't be the biggest task at hand for them. Just something that would be helpful. So very frustrating there. Also a little bit of frustration with some of our salon chapters, which I'll get into later. Um, and my other word was remembrance. And that mostly was dealing with Dalinar on multiple fronts. He's kind of remembering what it is to just be a soldier, I guess, with his little wrestling scene and all that stuff. He kind of just wants to remember, I guess, like simpler things or get his mind off of stuff. And then our kind of big thing at the end, that Dalinar apparently can remember his wife's name or hear it again, which we'll talk about a lot later. I'm curious to hear your thoughts once we get there. But that sums up basically my word of remembrance. So
Cool. Starting at chapter 12, the chapter opens up with Dalinar and the Stormfather having a conversation. And I feel like Dalinar has maybe not quite as many questions as Eliot does, but pretty close, and keeps asking the Stormfather a bunch of questions. And the Stormfather apparently has this arbitrary rule book of what you're allowed to know and what you're not. Thanks, Brandon Sanderson. It's just your clever, not so clever use of you're allowed to know this now, you're not allowed to know this now. Stormfather's just like, nope, I'm not going to tell you yet. So we have a couple answers in this chapter, and we still have a bunch of questions. So I'm obviously not a first-time reader, so I'm going to throw it over to one of you guys, and specifically about the Knights Radiant and like the structure of it and the lost radiance from the old, and Dalinar's trying to figure out how they worked and what that means for him going forward, etc., etc. And he's been asking the Stormfather some questions about the old Knights Radiant. So what are some of the questions that he's answered in this chapter and so far as well? And then what has he not been answering that we're still wondering about?
I can tackle your second question quicker than I can the first one. I'm very curious about learning more about the not the radiance, the heralds. We've now seen it, at least two, we think two heralds, like the actual heralds themselves. I feel like there's still a lot of gaps in, like, where did they come from? How did they get picked to be heralds? Are they humans that were sort of, divinely ascended to the rank of herald, or are they, godlike beings themselves of, powers beyond this world? Are they, characters like Wit or Hoyd that came from another world? Or I guess we're guessing still that Wit or Hoyd came from maybe Roshars's homeworld. We don't know. But I want to learn more about the heralds is my bottom line.
It's a similar construct to Light Song and Warbreaker, right? Where everybody calls them gods, but are they really gods? What, like, how much
Right.
is magic? How much is religion, and how much is explained magic that anyone could acquire, like through surge binding, it's stuff like that. So what everybody calls them the heralds, but are they just Knights Radiant who were in the right place at the right time to be a herald at that, like at a given battle to seal away Voidbringers or whatever? Like, what's the definition of a herald at this point?
yeah, there's definitely this theme that rises throughout these chapters of understanding, I guess, who the god is or who should be respected, where maybe tradition has taken over. That's really highlighted in our last chapter, about not submitting too much to just tradition because it's old and like therefore should be followed. But like what's really going to help them with their situation. Um, I guess I didn't have. I guess I didn't have any super major thoughts on this. So my biggest thing also is the heralds, since we've seen a couple of them, or at least interacted with a couple of them a little bit. I'm super intrigued to learn more about them and to see like what, like, we've seen them, but we really haven't learned much about them or ever seen anything from their perspective. So I'm really curious about that, and I would love to find out more. Um, but other than that, I didn't have anything major. It's kind of gotten to the point where if I start to worry about every little thing, like, I will never get through this book because there's a lot of unanswered questions at the moment. So,
He, I definitely agree with you, Paul. I just looking kind of scanning through my notes, a couple things I do see that we do learn a little bit about. I think mostly in chapter 16 of this week's chapter. The Stormfather tells Dalinar a little more about the Windrunner honor blade that he's got. He shares with him that it's a piece of honor himself, that it's not like the other shard blades, which we kind of already knew. It appears that the honor blades are not spren, which again we kind of already knew, but here's some definitive proof, I suppose, coming from the Stormfather. He talks about odium a little bit. He talks about how odium is much more powerful than he is, um, but that he's kind of more equivalent to like a force of nature almost. He explains that he's like pressure or time. He abides by his own laws and he just kind of is. But yeah, there's hints to a lot more ominous details that we just don't seem to have enough to quite piece together.
In that same couple pages, Dalinar actually has an interesting take on odium, that he's actually encouraged that honor could be killed, because in his mind that means odium can be killed. So he actually has hope that because honor failed, that there's a way for odium to fail, and he actually has a way to stop him. He doesn't have any idea what that is, but like, there's gods can't bleed, if I can say that iconic line.
I'm not going to be shocked if we get to the end of this series, or whenever this happens, when then the ultimate showdown with odium happens, and it gets revealed to us that like when a god dies, it's not the same death that we think of. We've already seen this on the miniature scale with Syl. We were told that Syl was dead, that Kaladin killed her, and yet it wasn't really the kind of death that we think about. It wasn't that she was permanently severed from her soul or her body. It was just that she was kind of reverted back to her primitive nature, and then she gets like awakened back from that again. So almost like a death and a rebirth sort of thing for Syl. Could that be the case with odium? Could that be the case with honor? Like I got 100% seeing that be the case of honor be not be necessarily the death that we think of.
Right.
yeah, I like that you mentioned that. I hadn't actually thought of that, but just kind of the sentiment that like evil is no more, almost, or like these things are no more, like kind of that sentiment, I guess, um, of that death, kind of like we've seen a bit with honor, but yeah, you're right. It's probably not going to be like, oh, they're going to literally kill ODM and that's like the end of it.
But yeah, we're in book 3, right? I mean, that's probably like book 10 stuff. So yeah, I'm not going to worry about it too much.
I'm sure it will happen at the end of this book, actually, now that you mention it.
Yeah, sure.
I think so.
Going back to something you said a little bit ago, Paul, that I can't worry about every little thing that happens in this book or else I'll never get through it. I had the very real fear when we started this podcast of the format of these books, because Elliot, you talked about last week how it's each book is zooming out a little bit, where Kaladin, book 1 is you're on a bridge run with Kaladin. All you want to see is Kaladin survive and get his men out. Like, that's the story. And then Words of Radiance is the battle on the Shattered Plains, and you're trying to win a war against the Parshendi, and like that's the scale of that book. Now, as we get into chapters 12 and 16, I think, Dalinar is talking to the monarchs all across Roshar, and we're still not even halfway through part 1 yet. So I had this very interesting thought when we were going through the Way of Kings of like, by the time we get to Oathbringer, how long are our episodes going to be, and how few chapters should we do? Because honestly, we could talk for an hour on 2 chapters, and we're trying to fit however many, five into this episode. So I don't know. We'll try not to get hung up on every little thing, because we will be here forever. So just
Yeah.
I too, part of my brain really wants to sit here and like analyze all the details and find all the hints and do it all, but I have to remind myself that I've clearly discovered that these books have a lot of really awesome reread value, which Paul, you and I haven't got to that point yet, but Trevor and everybody else out there has. Like I I can justify it to myself by thinking about it's okay. I don't have to catch everything the first time through because there will still be fun for me in the reread. I'll leave some nuggets behind on purpose so that I can find them again on my reread.
Sure. And kind of the thing that's pushing me through is I'm assuming I'm just not going to be able to find or know everything right now because there's so much stuff that we have yet to learn. That whenever I come back through, I'll be able to see all that stuff. That even if I did take and meticulously look through all these chapters, I wouldn't be able to find anyways. So kind of like we'll get through and see where everything goes, and then we can go back and look and see how it all connects more, potentially. So I see what you mean there, Trevor. Like if we really wanted to, we could do like 2 episodes to it, or 2 chapters to an episode. So, especially on some of our bigger chapters.
all right. So we kind of alluded to this last week, but through chapter 12, we have several conversations between Dalinar and some monarchs across Roshar. He sent out this message of saying, "I've made it to your Theru. Please come join me. We need to make a coalition against the Voidbringers." And everybody ends up dodging him by the end of the chapter, with the notable exception of Taravangian, which we'll talk about here in a second. But everybody who he's hoping, and he doesn't know that Taravangian is as big of a trouble that as we know him to be, but everybody else is deliberately avoiding Dalinar. And we kind of talked about this a little bit, but let's flesh out a little bit more here. Dalinar is conveniently forgetting and ignoring who he used to be, and we don't know if that's deliberate or if he physically cannot remember of who he used to be, because there is some of that, but we don't know to the extent of what that entails, of how much can he not remember of who he used to be in these flashback chapters, because we split chapter 11 and chapter 12 between 2 episodes, but the previous chapter that we're just coming out of is him sitting on the cliff of the rift being super depressed after what he's just done. And then we're into chapter 12 of all these monarchs are trying to avoid him because they know who he is. They've grown up hearing about the Blackthorn and Alethkar conquering half of the continent. So, and then he comes over and it's like, "Hey, come join me in your Theru. I'm your pal." Everybody's avoiding him now because nobody trusts the Alethi, and honestly, nobody should trust the Alethi. So, what were you guys' thoughts on this?
I didn't fully make that connection because we see Dalinar as he currently is, and I guess I at least had the understanding that like everyone kind of knows him currently, and albeit even though now we know him as a relatively like a good character, who has great intentions for things and good plans, he is definitely viewed as weird or like doing things untraditionally and just kind of almost a pot stirrer. Like he's kind of causing a lot of trouble, even by honestly doing like standing up for what is right in a way. And so yeah, I feel like a lot of people around Roshar just would be hesitant to get behind him. I also think it's funny. I'm pretty sure it mentions in this chapter with Taravangian joining him. Don't they mention like, oh yeah, and he's like the dumb one or something, or he's like known
Yes.
as not being very smart. And I thought that was really funny because there's the whole thing we talked about with his like intelligence. Like maybe they must have just caught him on a bad day, you know, like
Right.
on a dumb day. Which I think it was kind of funny, but
Well, and if you remember back to that Tervantian interlude, his advisor people that are around him all the time have deliberately shown him to the world on lower intelligence days in order to not seem a threat. So if he's too low on intelligence scale, they kind of just put him back in his room and wait till tomorrow. And then if he's too smart, they do the same thing because they don't want to let him make a bunch of important decisions, because then everybody will see. Well, there's more on the obligations here too, but that everybody's going to see, oh, Taravangian's really smart and really like has his hands in everything. So they lock him in his room on his really smart days too, which he's really frustrated about, and he tries to like fail his math test on purpose to so he can be king for the day. But so that's very deliberate, that everybody thinks he's the dumb old man king that nobody really pays attention to.
it's such an interesting thing. I know we touched on it before, like we talked a lot about it. And I think we can't even afford to go into it that much right now, but it's such a weird thing. Like he wakes up every day and is just a different intelligence level. Like it's so bizarre, and I don't know how it's supposed to like affect things, but I don't know. I guess we'll let it keep going. I don't know. It just seemed like a very odd effect. Um,
It makes Taravangian very unpredictable. It's I I I shuddered a little bit when I read that, they're Dalnar's getting all excited that, oh, at least I've got Taravangian with me, bless his soul. I was like, oh no, hold on a second. Like, no, 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 no. Like, if there's anyone you can't trust, it's him. And yet he's
True.
got this, reputation of being a bit of a dullard, and Dalnar's like, well, at least I've got one, trusty person. Is like, dude, he's the most untrustworthy of all of them because of this unpredictability that he's got. But of
Yeah,
course, Downer doesn't know that.
exactly. Also, this isn't that relevant, but just kind of the concept you talked about, Trevor, where they kind of keep him in his room on whether he's too dumb or like he's too smart on days like that. Um, I kind of get the sense, kind of like Warbreaker that we talked about, where kind of the advisors are. It seems like they're kind of pulling the strings and stuff, almost with like the God King, and it's not the same. But
Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking about that, and it's kind of interesting. So, yeah,
Elliot,
it's just kind of weird.
you were talking about how excited Dalinar was that Taravangian was joining him in book 1. He trusted Sadeas. That didn't go well for him. In book 2, he trusted Amaram. That didn't go well for him. So where's this one headed?
Yeah, nowhere good.
Oh
Nowhere good.
no, I didn't think about that. Yikes! Who's he gonna trust next book? Odium? I don't know. Like, what's gonna
Well,
if he makes it to next book?
I was gonna say, assuming he survives this book, we'll see. But yeah, I was intrigued by these sections with the other monarchs. You nailed it, Paul, with frustrating. I really wish that these other monarchs would work with Dalinar, but like we've been talking about, we see the real Dalinar. We know what his motives are. Everyone else has a very different picture of who Dalinar is, and Alethkar does not have the most clean track record. And so, yeah, I think Dalinar is going to be pretty hard pressed to unite them. He's been given a very, very monumental task.
Did you guys pick up on the behavior of the Parshmen across Roshar?
So we talked about this a little bit last episode, and we get a little bit more here. They don't seem to be as warlike as we were expecting them to be. It doesn't seem like they're the Stormform warrior Parshendi here to destroy you. They seem a little more like confused or a little more just like trying to survive. Here we get some examples of them negotiating. There's at least two, I think, different monarchs who are negotiating with the Voidbringers, which catches Dalinar and everybody else off guard, which I I'm gonna reprimand them a little bit. That they should not be surprised by this. They themselves negotiated with the Parshendi
Yep.
long before any of this was happening. That they should not be surprised that that's a tactic that the awakened Parshmen would use. Dalinar himself met with Eshonai more than once, or maybe it was Adolin that one time. I don't remember all the instances, but he's talked with them. He knows that they're willing to do that, and so for them to be so like caught off guard by this is a little surprising to me. I get that they just came out of a battle, a war with them, and so they're expecting these monsters to be taking over the world. But I think they're quickly realizing that's not necessarily what's happening here. It does still leave the big gaping question, though, of what do they want? What do the Parshmen, the Parshendi, the Voidbringers, what do they want? And Dalinar's kind of trying to figure this out. Kaladin's trying to figure this out, and they haven't gotten there yet. It seems like we might be heading to that direction pretty quick, but there's even one of the monarchs, I forget who it is. Is it the Eerie people from Eerie who are saying, hey, why don't we just give in to them and give them what they're asking for? It's not that crazy.
Right.
You know, I'm like screaming at the page, what is it? What do they want? What are they asking for? So I can't decide whether I think that's a good idea or not without knowing like what are their demands? What are they trying to accomplish? What is their goal? What is their motive? We haven't been able to figure that out yet.
That's true. The only thing that we've seen with that was our newly Stormform Eshonai and Adolin. I think it was Adolin, right, that talked to her. And basically she was like, yeah, like, we're just gonna kill everyone. Like, end of the story.
Yep.
And stuff, which was a little rough. That was also very tantalizing because it was almost a good conversation because she became Stormform like right before that, and then it was just a whole mess.
Yep.
So
yeah.
If you remember that conversation, Eshonai is wearing her shard plate for two reasons. Do you remember this? She's wearing shard plate to conceal her new carapace that she's wearing because she's in storm form, and to conceal her eyes because they're red. So she's wearing, and Adolin's wearing his shard plate to cover up that he's not Dalinar. So he's really happy that Eshonai isn't removing her armor and vice versa. So jumping forward a little bit to chapter 14, there's a very specific detail that Kaladin notices as he's spying on the Parshendi. Did you guys pick this up? Their eyes are not red. And he notices this, and he compares it to himself. He's like, well, my eyes don't glow unless I'm using Stormlight. Is it similar for them, where are their eyes not going to glow unless they're in the Everstorm using Stormlight, Storm? I don't know. Whatever you want to call it. But in the previous Kaladin chapter we had, he very specifically asks the villagers, and they tell him there's red light everywhere, and we think it was their eyes, and he's seen their red eyes on the Shattered Plains, but here they're not their eyes are not red. So do you guys have any thoughts on this, on the rules that are happening here?
this could go back to my whole there's a negative Stormlight or whatever with the Dark Sphere and the Everstorm. That would make way more sense is that it's tied to this Everstorm, right? Maybe that power is just something that can be summoned, but we don't know the system fully, but I imagine it's just kind of this whole like inverse of the Knights Radiant and stuff like that. Like it's just the underside or the opposite of that. In the same way that we know there were like not 10 or 9 heralds, um, one left behind, all that stuff. And weren't there like 9 shadows coming out from our Odium's champion, all that stuff? So it just seems like there's a whole flip side to everything that we know as good. And so I don't know, maybe they have their little evil Stormlight. So
Yeah, I did notice that they're clearly, well, maybe not clearly. My assumption is that this simply means they're not in storm form. That was kind of how I took it. Was I'm expecting the red eyes to be a byproduct of storm form, and so I'm taking this as okay. These parshmen have not transformed into storm form. They've transformed into like work form or war form or something a little less ominous, but maybe not necessarily. Maybe they are in Stormform. They're just not charged with whatever dark light
infused.
there it is that comes out of the Everstorm. I jumping forward while we're talking about chapter 14. Trevor, you mentioned the red lights, which I've thought could potentially be the spren that we've seen come up a couple times. The storm spren, or I don't know if we know exactly void spren. I think sometimes we've theorized they could potentially be. We've seen them in relation to the Parshendi on the Shattered Plains, or like Syl keeps seeing them, or something like that back then. I'm wondering if those spren are just kind of like hanging out with the Parshmen and the Voidbringer versions, so that's what these red lights are, not the eyes, perhaps. But then I also noticed in that chapter 14, there's another perhaps Spren like character or being that appears that seems very odd. Kaladin gets caught eventually as he's spying on the Parshmen, but he's caught by this ribbon of yellow light is the way he describes it, of something like alerts them to oh, there he is, he's right there, and it's just described as a ribbon of yellow light, which sounds very spren-ish but also very new. What is that?
That's a great question. Um, Trevor, what do you think? Why don't you tell us what that is?
One
And
of
just
the parshmen lost his scarf, and it has little Christmas lights on it.
okay,
So it's a
okay,
little yellow ribbon of light just flying
okay.
past.
It just flew off. Yeah,
Yeah,
All makes sense now.
he is the wind, right? So it flew towards him, of course.
yeah.
Okay,
There you go.
great. Okay, so it was a scarf spren.
Yeah.
Scarf spren,
Yeah, scarf
obviously.
spren and Christmas light spren. Okay, cool.
All of that to say, I think we've got some spren shenanigans going on. Potentially
True.
some red spren, some yellow spren. We've got some potentially new, definitely strange sprenness going on.
We can mention it briefly, although I don't want to spend too much time on this. But poor Gavilar. I don't know if you guys feel sorry for him or if you guys think he's pathetic, because there are people in the fandom that think both of like the.
Do you mean Elokar?
Yes, I do mean Elokar. I apologize.
Mm.
Where Elokar is trying his best. He really is, and he's just not succeeding anywhere. And he finally acknowledges this
It is kind of funny.
and surrenders his regency of Urithiru to Dalinar, like officially, and so Dalinar is the king of Urithiru now, and gives his princedom to Adolin, although he hasn't really had that conversation with Adolin yet. But not that that really matters because they're not in Elokar. So, Dalinar is now the king of Urithiru and the Shattered Plains, and Elhokar is like answering to him while in Urithiru. Whatever you guys' takeaways from this little scene here.
I was just kind of stuck thinking, can Elhokar do that? Like who gives him the authority to grant the high kingship of Urithiru over all the lands of the entire world to Dalinar? Like it's a very strange promotion slash resignation slash I don't even know.
Yeah, it's kind of like the is that allowed? Like
Right.
question. Like, can you do? Is that allowed? Like, can you do that? So I didn't know what to think about it, and Dalinar's like, please don't do this. Like, for a bit of it. It's like only if I have to.
I
kind of
I did
breezed past
actually.
that.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
No,
you
you're
there,
good.
Paul. But I did actually kind of like this direction that they're heading in, because Dalinar and Elhokar are clearly kind of there's some conflict going on there. Dalinar knows what needs to be done, and he's just getting up and doing it. But he's clearly treading on Elhokar in the process. I mean,
Quite literally, when he knocks him
well,
over
well,
and puts
yes.
Yes.
But I mean,
Don't try to
Dalinar is out there, negotiating with all the other nations of Roshar. That should be definitely Elhokar doing that, not
as the leader of the Alethi, and he's like, "Come join us."
yeah.
And Elhokar's just sitting there like, yeah.
Exactly. And so I think this may actually be a good step in that it may clear up the relationship there a little bit. If we can kind of define, Elhokar, this is your realm, this is what you're responsible for. Dalinar, you have different goals here. You're not so much focused anymore on Alethkar. You're focused on the bigger picture of trying to bring together multiple nations. So that I think is good. I wonder how this is going to be received by all the other nations. Who died and made you king of the entire world.
Right.
Kind of is essentially the response I'm expecting him to get when he says, "I, Dalinar, High King of Urithiru, summon you to join me." Yeah, that's not going to go well.
Right. I mean, people already think the Alethi are entitled to whatever they want because back a generation ago, Gavilar took whatever he wanted. So now Dalinar's like, yeah, I'm in Urithiru. Come join my coalition and join my army,
Exactly.
Like, we want you to fight against the Voidbringers.
Yes, exactly. More motivational posters.
Yeah.
All right. Chapter 13 and chapter 15 together.
Yes.
All right. So before we jump, no, actually, I'll save that for a second here. Shallan and Adolin are still going strong, which we had a couple maybe hints of something happening between Shallan and Kaladin in Words of Radiance, and maybe that's still a happen, but Shallan and Adolin are flirting back and forth. There's multiple lines where in this chapter where you're like, I don't know, I don't want to. I don't know if this was your reaction, Paul, but it's like, I don't really want to read that, like, don't, moving on, like, Paul, what were your thoughts in chapter 13 and chapter 15?
So it's definitely not as bad as Dalinar and Navani for whatever reason, but
okay.
But yes, I agree. I mean, it's kind of whatever. I honestly didn't mind it that much. I will say in chapter 15 I had a lot of complaints, which we'll get to in a little bit. But as far as like the whole love triangle, I think it is at least a little interesting because it is a kind of a triangle. Kaladin is kind of on the outskirt of it. It's just kind of hinted at randomly. Whereas Adolin and Shallan are like betrothed, kind of. They're like engaged, or however it fully works there. So it's a bit different, but there's kind of that hint there of like, ooh, so it makes it at least a little interesting. But yeah, I don't care about that stuff. It reminded me a lot about you. I think it wasn't this past episode, but the episode before. You were talking about like how weird it is about safe hands,
Oh
and
yeah.
that was really like showcased here. That she was like, oh my gosh, like she put like 4 layers over her safe hand, in kind of a panic because she was like had nothing on her safe hand whenever Adolin like arrived and stuff, and it was kind of funny. Um, but as far as all the mushy stuff goes, I was just glad we had Pattern there to make sure there's no mating.
Elliot, I'm curious if you were picked up on this, but what's Pattern's first thought when he hears the word inappropriate?
Inappropriate. You mean like dividing by 0?
Dividing by 0.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love
Stuff you
that
should
line.
never ever
That's right.
consider doing. Yeah, I'll stop you from that. And then I just imagine him like he retreats to his little bowl or whatever he's doing, and then for the next like 20 minutes is just thinking like, what could they possibly be doing? Like what could it be? I just don't get. Oh, wait, no mating.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
it is. It was great. I love that.
Patterns are little
And this
what's that? Have you guys seen Soul, the new Pixar movie?
Mm-hmm.
What's the dude's name that's keeping track of all the souls passing through, and he's just like the numbers guy? And
Terry.
yes, Terry, thank you. And I just imagine Pattern being like that, where he's just kind of in the shadows, like doing all his like number things. And it's like, what would be the most inappropriate thing ever? Oh, dividing by 0, obviously.
Yeah,
Like,
missing a count, missing
Yeah.
one of the counts. I almost thought of it as like if you had like someone who is just from a much older generation or something that like is trying to figure out what kids nowadays do,
right.
and just kind of would go through a list and be like, I bet this is what these kids are talking about, or like I don't know if you see the jokes with like parents who use abbreviations wrong, like LOL and stuff like that. Like that's kind of what I was getting here. That same energy, just like Pattern has no clue what's going on, but he's trying. Um, so very sweet of him. But
I'm still sticking to my. I think I may have broken this out like very shortly after we first met Pattern, but I still think he's the Olaf of this story. He's the goofy snowman who's completely out of his element, and he's the Olaf to Shallan's Elsa, I suppose.
sure, he's like yeah, like he's the snowman who's like I can't wait for summer and like
Right.
days at the beach,
Just yep,
stuff like that.
goofy. I think special kid, isn't that what we called him at one point?
Yes.
Oh, bizarre kiddo.
Bizarre
Yeah.
kiddo. There you go.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Shallan, Veil, brightness radiant. So Shallan is painted like Adolin gets all excited, like, yo, we should practice with our shard blades. You've got a shard blade. That's like what I'm all about. So I'm gonna teach you how to use shard blade, whether you like it or not. So I brought them with me, even though before I even asked. I'm gonna go get those shard blade guards. I'll be right back. And Shallan is like freaking out. Like I hate summoning my blade. I only do it to summon or to work the oath gates. I'm not going to use this at all. And then she kind of composes herself and paints brightness radiant onto herself. We've seen this a little bit with Veil, but what were your guys's emotions? I suppose I always say thoughts, so I'm going to try to something else of
How was I
Shallan
feeling?
versus Veil versus brightness radiant.
I would like to know Elliot's thoughts first because I have a lot to say and I don't want to influence anything.
I could definitely share some of what I was thinking or feeling during this section. I was first off, I think, impressed with Shallan, and that this is I think a fairly clever tactic of compartmentalization. She she can't handle wielding that blade because of the memories that are attached to it. So she compartmentalizes by saying, "Okay, I'm going to be a person who doesn't have to deal with that." And that is a ineffective way for her to deal with that barrier, that challenge. But then on the flip side, I'm very disappointed in Shalon in that we're back to the whole that is a terrible way of coping with that. The whole I'm just going to pretend this didn't happen and hide behind this persona of another person. And while I Shalon has been through some terrible stuff, and I totally, you know, don't want to, put myself in that position and say that I wouldn't do the exact same thing, but she's kind of avoiding her problems, and I don't think it's going to end well.
See, there is one thing that I have to say. In that I didn't think of it that much in the context of her struggling to use her shard blade. That does add some extra context and make it a little more justifiable. But my big like audacity statement at the beginning was, I think this was horrible, and I think it may be it's easily my least favorite thing in Oathbringer, maybe the series thus far. Like, I think it
Wow.
was really bad. The series thus far is a bold statement, so maybe not that far. But I
Even
think this
worse
was
than Shalon being the villain of the Wave Kings.
definitely like, so that's kind of a joke. Just like what's actually happening in the story, you know? Like, jokes aside, like what's actually happening in the story, like I've definitely had a couple like random thoughts. I don't remember exactly what it was that made me think that, but basically just like I think this is bad. Like, I honestly was cringing like reading this. I thought it was really I didn't like it at all. I think my biggest thing was just
Can I clarify something? Do you not like
yes.
this like in writing, or for like for Shalon as a character? Do you not like is this poor writing, or like, or is this
I think it's more of for Shalon as a character,
okay?
but a little bit of poor writing. Like, I think poor writing just because I didn't like it.
Okay.
I straight up did not like this part. And so that's why I think that. But as far as whether it was an effective tool, like writing tool, it is. So that's fair. I have to kind of separate those two. But the reason I don't like it is, so, Shalon does struggle with this wanting to be perceived and like presenting herself in a strong fashion, right? She always talks about Yasna. Yasna's kind of her depiction of her goals, like what she wants to be and stuff like that. But just reading, like, she portrays herself as brightness radiant and like fully instantly goes into this character and talks to Adolin through brightness radiant and like just talks really weird and stuff, and it was just very uncomfortable, and I thought it was really annoying, like, just being honest. I didn't like it at all. Like, I understand the concern, but I feel like it was so extreme that I didn't like it. I thought it was really cringy to read, honestly. Um So yeah, I feel like I have very strong thoughts about it, and maybe it's a little mean, but like the whole brightness radiant thing that she did, I thought it was really I didn't like it at all. It's straight up, it's my least favorite chapter so far of this book, easily. Like, I just did not I th- I thought it was just really poor. I didn't like brightness radiant at all, and I thought it was like, just reading, I don't remember specific quotes of the dialogue, but just like
She calls him Bright Lord Colin, and yeah,
mhm,
there's a
all
couple
of that stuff.
other phrases of like, I don't
Just
know.
all that stuff, and she
She
just like
even refers to
flips.
Shalon like another person.
Yes.
She's like, "Oh yeah,
Exactly,
Shalon used to
exactly,
draw that." I was like, "Wait, who's talking
exactly.
here?"
Like I was thinking about that, like, because Adolin was there talking to Shalon, then he leaves for a second and comes back and is now talking to Brightness Radiant, who's talking about Shalon and all this stuff, and like in a realistic sense, this is a book, right? But in a realistic sense, it's like if I'm Adolin, like, and this happens to me, I'm like, okay, like, sorry, I don't know that we're gonna get married anymore. Like, this is a little concerning, right? Um, and like, I don't know, it was just very weird, and I didn't like it. I thought it was really like all the stuff was just very weird, and I don't think it was even a great way to show her concern of being like kind of separating herself from Shalon, who struggles with these things. I do get that concern, but I didn't like the way it was. I thought it was really. I feel like I'm just beating a dead horse at this point, but I thought it was like a poor way to represent that. I think it was just so over the top. Like it was way too far to try and get a point across. That it was kind of ridiculous.
Would you have felt better, Paul, if perhaps like the lines that she was audibly speaking were instead like thoughts in her head of like Shalon and this character of Brightness Radiant, like the two of them talking as opposed to like actually Brightness Radiant talking to Adolin? Would that have been a better way to portray it, perhaps, for you?
I think definitely. So I think it was the fact that she was like made herself into Brightness Radiant and was talking to Adolin. I would have even given it that if Adolin came and initially, like right out of the gate, she was Brightness Radiant. I do understand this was because of the Shardblade situation, where I didn't actually remember that on my own. I kind of just remembered that from, or realized that from what you were saying, Elliot. Um, I would have even been fine if it was just she was trying to compose herself in a different manner or appear different to people or as more confident. I would totally get that, but it was even if you took that away and it was just the speech, I think the speech and the way she like was talking to Adolin was what really frustrated me and like what really um like bothered me and I thought was kind of bad. Um so I think that was my biggest thing. So there are lots of things that would change that and it wouldn't be so bad, but like listening to it, I was honestly like I thought it was kind of painful. Like it was interesting to listen to and stuff and just kind of awkward.
So I do have something to say, but I can't say it.
I will go out on a limb that may help you, Trevor, and I don't know if it will. But so if you remember back to the Way of Kings where there's a Shalon chapter I didn't like and I deemed it quote unnecessary.
Unnecessary.
I don't know if this is maybe a similar thing where this will come into a bigger effect later on that we'll get to look back on and be like, oh my goodness, it was great we had this chapter before. And I'm hoping for something like that. But this chapter on its own and seeing Brightness Radiant as Shalon has crafted her, I think is really like I just don't like it, and I think it was very rough. So
I'll say this for now, that you are absolutely not alone, and that there are a decent amount of people that do not like this as a character point for Shalon. But I can't say anymore, and we will come back to this, I promise. But
okay.
we can't talk. I can't talk about it anymore.
That's cool.
Than that.
I'm glad to know at least I'm not alone in that standpoint. Right. I didn't think I would be. I thought honestly that y'all may have stronger feelings about it too, which is fine if you don't. Like I do understand that, like kind of where the point comes from. But I think it was, yeah, I just did not like it. So
I'm extra curious now where this might be going if Trevor can't even talk us through this one scene. So I'm intrigued now.
Yeah. It definitely seemed like a not super important scene. Like kind of like just like the funny little side piece, I guess. I didn't pick up anything super major from it at least.
Right.
So yeah, we'll see where that goes. Anyways, with that, I lay my point to rest and move on. So
Chapter 16.
mm-hmm.
We have we've got more Dalinar self dialogue. Basically, he has Seth's old Windrunner blade, and he's hiding it. And he's referenced the fact that he could he could use it as like a tool to give somebody Windrunner powers. So, and like maybe scout form or something if Kaladin's not around. So he's toying with that idea. And now that Gavilar, why do I keep saying that? Now that Elokar wants to go to Alethkar, man, to
Farewell.
to take back his homeland with Kaladin. If he does that when Kaladin gets back, he's gonna need, like, depending on how long that takes, he's gonna need a Windrunner because you know Uthir is out in the middle of the sky basically. So he could really use a Windrunner around here. So any thoughts on where this blade is gonna go to?
I think that Dalinar is really wise to be cautious here. It would be super convenient for him to pick, heck, Adolin.
Adolin, yeah.
Adolin has not been,
Adolin's the obvious choice, right? Like,
yeah, sure. Or even, yeah, just like temporarily give it to one of his, generals that he trusts or something, like to get those Windrunner powers, which would be very useful right now. But I think he's very smart, perhaps at the advice of the Stormfather, to realize this is really dangerous actually, because it is, one, a ton of power, but two, as we've seen with Zeth, it's kind of power without a check and balance to it.
without the
The
spread,
knights,
right?
exactly. The Knights Radiant have their spren, which kind of help to guide them and lead them and prod them towards their purpose and what they're supposed to be doing. The person who wields this honor blade doesn't have that. They're on their own. And so you better really trust that person to know what they're supposed to be doing before they do that. So I think this is really smart on Dalinar's part to not quickly hand this off to, someone just for the sake of convenience.
And we've talked about it in last episode and this episode that the amount of weight that Adolin's feeling at the moment, that hasn't been on the back burner in these last couple chapters. We've been seeing a lot of what Adolin's been going through on multiple different fields with Shallan and with his brother Renarin and with Sadeas. What he like, Adolin's got a lot on his mind, and if he were to be given this honor blade, like, it may not be the right timing for that. So
But before we talk about more of the politics, did you have more on that honor blade, Trevor, that we needed to talk about?
nope.
Before we move on to maybe back to some of the politics or Dalinar's past, although this is tied to Dalinar's past, in this chapter, Dalinar has a short moment where he's talking or thinking to himself more about the thrill, and he drops a line that caught me off guard. He seems to imply that the thrill is uniquely Alethi. Did I catch that right, Trevor?
Yeah, and this is not actually the first time you've heard this.
And that doesn't surprise me with all this stuff going on. It doesn't surprise me that I missed this before, and maybe it was even in my notes. And we've had so much stuff that I've forgotten about it. But this actually is making me rethink a little bit about the thrill. Why is the thrill unique to people from Alethkar? That seems really strange. Even kind of given some of the previous implications that perhaps the thrill is tied to Spren. We had some hints in from Taravangian that he's like hunting the thrill Spren, perhaps, or hunting the death rattle Spren. Again, it's all very vague wording. We don't really know exactly what, but if the source of the thrill is some sort of mystical being, why only Alethi? That's strange. But he also talks about and thinks about how he comes to the conclusion now, as opposed to like previous Dalinar, that he realizes now that there's something wrong about the thrill. That there's perhaps a bit of a not so good force behind it, perhaps.
Yeah, that's something that I didn't actually catch on to that the thrill is strictly Alethi. I did not catch on to that, and that's really interesting. And this may not be the case, but what I feel would explain this well is seeing if other nations or groups have a thing of their own.
Oh yeah.
I don't know how that would really tie into things. Um, but I am a little confused. My thought was maybe it has something to do with like being around these oath gates or something like that. I'm just trying to think of like I don't know. I feel like it had to be something geographical. I really don't know. I'm kind of it's just all speculation right now.
Well,
And it's hard to say. But
you're sparking some ideas in my brain here, Paul. I had not thought about this until you just said that. Didn't we at one point weren't we exploring some version of the map that had like 10 kingdoms on it? And we theorized that this was perhaps tied to like the 10 heralds, or 10 is a unique number. But perhaps like the number of regions of Roshar seem to have some significance. Do you guys remember that
Yep.
perhaps?
yes, yeah. I think it
May
was that there's like the old map that has like the old names
Yeah.
for the
It's in
places
the
or something.
it's in
Yeah.
the hardback Way of Kings copy, and it calls Alethkar Alethala, and
Yeah.
Babatharnum is another name. I don't remember, but yeah, there's all the old names on it.
What if
Mhm.
that is somehow tied to this, and where you're kind of going with this, Paul, of each of those different regions has like a sponsoring spread power thing,
Yeah.
and whatever the source of the thrill is the one that's tied to Alethala or Alethkar
Mhm.
region, maybe. Yeah, it's more of the geographical element of that. That's
Yeah.
I like that thought train.
It definitely could be. It's just kind of a we can kind of be on the lookout because if there's something like that for other groups, then I feel like we can really entertain
Yeah,
that idea. Until
totally.
then, I feel like it's kind of just a forethought. I don't know. It's like not as solidified, but we could see. I don't know. Maybe Mr. Reread value here, Trevor. I don't know if maybe there's stuff we've missed, and he probably can't share that. But if there's like stuff we've missed or we've seen other groups, like whenever we're in Shenovar, or places like that, where they have, I don't know, a passive ability or like this kind of innate trait
We
of
we have
sorts.
seen one person who perhaps has a regionally bound superpower, if you will, and I'm thinking of Axes. His like special powers and abilities of like the tattoo notes he takes on his own skin, and the way he can just like control the anatomy of his body at will, is implied that that's perhaps an Amian ability. It's an ability tied to like where he's from. So is the thrill the Alethi version of, yeah, their racial power that they get? Hmm.
It
Now
could
I'm
be.
even more intrigued.
I had not thought of that.
All I'll say is I'm really glad you're thinking along the lines that you are. It's like keep going with it, because geographical. I was going to bring up the word geographical if you didn't, Paul, because they Teravangian is hunting for Spren at a specific location, and what's our Amian friend who's hunting Spren? Is
Axes.
Axes. He's
Mm-hmm.
in the Reshi Isles hunting Spren in a specific location. Like there is, and Shalon in the other chapter we just read, she got shame Spren for the second time in a week in Yorothiru, and hadn't ever had shame Spren from where she's from. So there is something geographical happening with certain Spren in certain places. So
Interesting stuff. Anyway, now that was all I had on thrill. We can go on and wrap up with some of the political final things if we haven't touched on those, and then the revelation we get at the very end.
Dalinar's having a spar with Kadash, or it ends up not well. It's with another guy, right? And Kadash is there, or does it end up sparring with Kadash? I don't remember.
Well, he has a wrestling match with some random guy, and then he does have a sparring match with Kadash while he's negotiating with the
Iriali Queen.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And Navani's there all upset because Dalinar's fencing and talking to a queen at the same time. So Kadash is here confronting him about his religion and claiming that the honor is dead, or the Almighty, as he calls him. So, and Dalinar's just trying to blow off some steam, right? Like he's getting really frustrated with all these politics that's happening, and he just wants to, you know, wrestle somebody, and like the good old days. And Kadash is here rubbing him all the wrong way and telling him, like, hey, you need to, like, I'm an Ardent, but I'm also one of your generals, so I feel like I need to confront you about this path that you're going down, because, you know, I'm an honorable, like, shout out to Kadash, who's has the courage to speak up about what he thinks that Dalinar should be doing, because nobody else is really willing to tell him these things, that they're all just talking about how he's a heretic behind his back. But Kadash, he's like, I've known you for so long. Why are you doing this? Why are you talking about the Almighty being dead? That type and stuff like that. And Kadash is speaking his mind on who Dalinar is, who he thinks he could be, that type of thing. So I really like Kadash. Just throwing that out there.
I like the.
I'm kidding. Sorry. Continue. I'm sorry.
I like the conversation that Dalinar and Kadash have here about faith, essentially. As Dalinar is questioning the Vorin faith of basically saying, hey man, I've got some new evidence here. Like, tell me why I need to believe in your religion when I have reason to believe otherwise. And Kadash is just kind of chiding him for, you know, I'm putting words in his mouth, but he basically kind of says that the purpose, that the whole reason it's called faith is because you have to have faith. You believe in the God because that's what you're supposed to do. And Dalinar doesn't like that answer. He says, you know, come back when you can show me evidence, show me a reason why I need to believe it. And that's the difference between Dalinar and the Vorin Church at this point, is much like Yasna, and I think they even reference Yasna in this scene. Dalinar's questioning, and the Ardents don't like that.
While he's having this conversation, he's also talking with the Iriali Queen via Navani and a span reed off to the side, and she kind of just drops an offhand comment of, yeah, we're gonna sign a treaty with the Voidbringers. And Dalinar is like, you're gonna side with the enemy? What do you mean? Like, how is that even an option? That we're talking about Voidbringers, you know, Knights Radiant. Everybody has heard children's stories of the Voidbringers, and you're gonna sign a treaty with them? Like, he's so frustrated at this point with people.
And I mentioned this earlier. I can't decide how I think about this because I don't know what the Voidbringers' terms are. If they truly are coming to the Iriali people and saying, "Hey, let's work together," I'm all for partnering with them. Like, that sounds like a great idea. Let's have peace and not war. That sounds fantastic. But if they're asking for, like, oh, and you're gonna pay us, you know, like human sacrifices and, you know, all this other stuff, then then yeah, absolutely. Why are we partnering with evil in doing this? So we need more info here. We need more info, and I'm hoping that Kaladin is actually going to be our source of that. He's behind enemy lines, if you will, at this point. So I'm hoping Kaladin will get us a few pieces to fill in our puzzle.
We kind of skipped over that, but yeah, Kaladin's captured or gave himself up willingly. He could have flown off at any point, but he's like, no, I'm going to surrender and see what's happening here.
That was at the very end of 14, wasn't it?
Yeah.
His little glimpse, with the yellow scarf spread. Yeah.
Yes.
I actually, on that really quick, I thought that was actually really intelligent of Kaladin. Kaladin can sometimes be a act first, think later kind of person.
Yeah.
And that was actually really smart when he realized, hang on a second, this is not what I thought it was. Let me take this slowly and I'll surrender, realizing that he can probably escape whenever he wants. But let me collect some more info here. Let me figure out, like, kudos to Kaladin. That was a think first instead of the punch everybody and then realize it was a bad idea.
Yeah. All right, we had a name drop, quite literally, at the end of this chapter. And Dalinar does the biggest double take in the world. Is it Navani who says his wife's name? And she's like, yeah, but like back when Evie was alive. And he's like, what did you just say? And when he's like, oh, I'm sorry, I forget you can't hear her name. He's like, no, I can hear her name. Like, hold on. So what
I envisioned this as the classic movie scene where like Dalinar's eyes get wide and the camera like zooms into his eyes, and then you see this like super fast flash of like all his memories of her like all playing all at once, and then like it zooms back out and Dalinar's like, oh, I know. Like that I saw all of that in my head like as I read this section. It was big moment.
Definitely. I definitely got the similar depiction there, Elliot. I was a little confused because I don't know what's changed that he's like can hear.
Yeah,
I guess I just have to
exactly.
read and find out. But I feel like we haven't had anything. I think it would be this would be a monumental thing that either changed or I don't know. Maybe it's with his relationship with the Stormfather somehow, because I feel like that's gone pretty well. Like they're kind of friends now. I think, um, as good of friends as you can be with them. Like
yeah.
So I don't know, but I'm that's my biggest thing right now is I want to find out what happened there, what's going on there.
Yeah, I totally agree, Paul. We've had a few momentous things that have happened in Dalinar's life recently, but none of them seem to have like immediately triggered this. And so it's hard to tell what it is. Is it him marrying Navani? Is it him bonding with the Stormfather? Is it the presence of the Everstorm is like weakening the magic that's got a hold on him? Like there's a lot of different reasons this could be, and there doesn't seem to be any obvious this happened, now he can remember his wife, got it. It's yeah, where did this come from?
Would you guys like to read and find out?
Yes, please. No, we're done here. All right.
I think this is where I'm calling it. Sorry, guys.
Don't say that.
I'm kidding. I actually cannot wait. So honestly, my favorite part about recording is afterwards I know I get to read more.
True. Any closing thoughts on episode 59?
We've got some head scratchers. There's some stuff going on that's making us think in this one. Much less action and much more. I don't know if I want to say intrigue, because when I say intrigue, I think of like Warbreaker and like the whole like political intrigue, murder mystery, but this is more of like
murder mystery.
I don't know. Very yeah. It's very like heady, strategical. What's going on? What do we need to do next? Who's doing this and why? Where are the armies at?
Who done it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely. I think there is one just like really big takeaway, and it's just the whole no mating.
No
No
mating.
mating.
It was a great summary for our episode here. So
No
that's
mating.
exactly. That's my big takeaway from these chapters. So
All right. Well, we can reconvene next week after we read some more. Thanks for joining me, Elliot and Paul.
Until next time.